Hello, this is my virtual presentation for TLAB 2014 at Berkhamsted School. This presentation is on engaging English lessons and digital tools, and this section of the presentation is on poetry. I'll be sharing with you some of the approaches that I find to be powerful when I've used them with my classes. So just to begin with, word jumbles are something that I like to use with my classes when I'm looking at poems. So getting the whole text of a poem will need to be electronically or type it out yourself, and popping it into a tool. Teach It, I believe, have a tool where you can just copy and paste in the text of the poem, and it jumbles the words up so that it is, they actually kind of unjumble it, I suppose, to form the words into alphabetical order rather than their actual order of the poem. This can help students to have a look at the patterns in language. It can also allow them to connect with the key ideas in the poem by taking out the words, playing around with them, perhaps creating a story or a poem of their own, and that can just help them connect with the language before they jump into actually studying the poem. Another activity that I like to use with my poetry classes is word clouds. The tool I'll show you now is a tool called Wordle. So just here I have ready the text of William Wordsworth's Daffodil. So this is how you do it. Just simply copy it like this, and then you go to Wordle. You create. You don't have to sign in or anything like that. You just paste in the text of that poem. So I've got the full text there, and then you click go. You can also put the URL in if it's just from the whole website that you want to crunch. See, that would be less appropriate with a poem. So there you can see the full text of the poem is crunched into the Wordle document. You can then obviously screenshot this or save it on the Wordle website and use that with your classes. Now this makes the language that's used the most in the poem, so that the words that appear most often, larger. You can randomise it so it's different shapes. Obviously this is in the shape of a fish if that's not appropriate. If you want it a more random shape, you can actually randomise it. There we go. So change the colours, change the shape, things like that. The words will still be the same, so the larger words are the words that appear more often. So it can bring out quite interesting patterns within the poem. Okay, acting out the actions as well. This can be quite fun. So once you've had a look at the poem, studied it, or perhaps when you first come to the poem, just having a look at the story of the poem, you can get students either in pairs or standing around in a circle can be quite fun. That as one person, whether it's yourself or another student, or you have perhaps an audio recording playing, reads the poem, and as the poem is being read, the students are challenged to act out the actions of the words. It can be quite funny. It's quite a fun and interactive way to think about the language in the poem without it being too daunting. And the onion approach is something that I like to use with my poetry classes. This is highlighted on my blog if you want to have a look at it in a bit more detail. But it simply means sort of taking the poems in layers, if you like, as you would see an onion layer if you cut it in half. So I will show them the image of an onion cut in half and show them the layers and say that on the surface, we're going to approach the poem as we would approach peeling an onion. So on the surface, we're going to have a look at the surface of it. So perhaps you can decide what the layers mean to your class, but the way I approach it often is that the top surface is the story of the poem, and then the surface beneath is picking out perhaps some of the poetic devices that are appearing in the poem and just noting them down. You can do this as a visual diagram as well, so actually have a diagram of an onion and get them to write these in. Then perhaps the next layer is picking out individual words, nouns, verbs, adjectives, looking at language breakdown there. And then perhaps the centre layer would be the deeper meaning, so the implied meaning or the overall kind of message of the poem. Again, you can play around with the different layers, but it just clearly gives them approach to have a look at a poem. Visual responses as well. So if a class is struggling with getting to grips with a poem, I will often just get them, as we're reading through the poem, to doodle, if you like, around the poem itself. And so you can just use pens, but I like to give colour pens, so it's more vibrant when they're having a look back over it, and just literally draw out the images that are popping up as they go through the poem, where they appear. That helps with their note taking as well. Not for everybody, but that works for some students, and they can break down what's going on in the poem a lot quicker by having a look at the visuals. Having a role play of the poetry, so getting up and getting them to act different sections of it out, can really help some students to connect with the emotions or the feelings and see it in a slightly different way. Poetry essay train. I have talked about essay trains or writing trains on my blog, so again, have a look at that if you want a little bit more detail. But in essence, if we're having a look, I often use this with GCSE or A-level classes, if we're having a look at a particular poem, I will, towards the exam, we'll have a look at a number of questions. An essay writing can become quite dull as they get towards their exam. So the way that we break this up is to occasionally use the essay train technique. And that can be, I'll give you an example of how you use it. We'll give them one essay title, and all of the students will be covering this essay. We will plan collaboratively as a class on the board a very simple kind of 5 key areas to our essay, and they could form 5 key sections or 5 paragraphs depending on the level that you're teaching. 5 key sections of the essay, and everybody will follow that collaboratively planned essay plan. Once the timed essay begins, you will sit your class in groups, perhaps of 4 or 5 if there's 5 sections, and you will ask them all to follow the plan, and you'll give them perhaps 5-10 minutes on the first section that you would have discussed as a class already, and you would get them to write that first section. Then you will pause, perhaps with a bell or some kind of timer, and they will pass the essay on to the next person who will write the second section. They will then have another essay in front of them because it will go round the table. So they'll write the second section that somebody else has begun the first section. Then again, it's timed, the bell goes, you pass it on, they'll read what the others have written, and then they will do the third section of the essay. And again, the bell goes, passing it on, they'll read the sections 1, 2 and 3 that other people have formed, and they will write the fourth section of the essay, and so on. And then the last round, if you like, perhaps when you've gone around the whole, and each of them have written 5 sections, and there's 5 in the group, you'll pass it around one last time so that the essay in front of them will be the one that they wrote the first paragraph of. And they will mark that essay then. So as a class, I would pull them back together. We'd go through the assessment criteria again, because we'd always have gone through it at the beginning as well. And they will mark the essay that they began and see how others have actually developed that essay. It gets them to have a look at the different writing styles within the class. It gets them to have a look at the different perspectives on the same topic, because they'll all be following the same essay plan, but will come out with very different sections of that essay. So that works quite well as mixing up the kind of essay training, and it also gives you a large amount of example essays that you can photocopy, share out with the class. They can discuss how different people have approached it. Performance poetry, this again is something that makes it quite fun to approach the poetry. Often I'll do this after we've had a look at some John Agard poetry and him reading it in his very individual and vibrant manner, and we'll talk about how you can approach poetry and how you can read it in a more dramatic way. So we'll practice to do with tone of voice. We will practice using whether we're loud or quiet. We'll practice emotion, different types of emotions for the same sentences. So just really performing and being overly dramatic. It loosens them up with the poetry, makes them able to connect with what's going on a lot quicker, and makes them have fun with the poem as well. Freeze framing the poetry. Again, this brings out, it's not just a drama activity for the sake of it, it brings out imagery within the poetry. So if you have the groups performing freeze frames for the same section, again, you will see the different freeze frames that come out from that are really fascinating to analyse. You can have them freeze for a minute or so and get the class to break down why they think they've done different things with that particular phrase or quote from the poem.